Now, there was this man named Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson had a very severe problem. His problem was that he was an alcoholic. His problem became so severe that even when he was graduating with his law degree, he could not graduate since he was too drunk to receive his diploma. Now, that wasn't because he didn't do anything to help himself. He did exactly what we would expect. He's committed himself to drug and alcohol addiction therapy at a hospital. But he didn't just do it once. He did this 4 times. And I can imagine the frustration of Mr. Wilson, who has gone to hospital after hospital receiving treatment, only to leave that hospital and to find himself at the bottom of a bottle. We could feel that frustration too. The frustration when we do all the right things, yet we find ourselves failing. That feeling, that frustration, the angst, that if I just do better, if I just do the right things one more time, I will not fail. Because when failure comes, we feel frustration, especially when doing the right things no longer work. So what should we do? What should we do as believers when we encounter the frustration of failure? Or to answer that question, we're going to look at the lives of Jesus' disciples, that ragtag group of men who are very much comfortable and familiar with failure. So will you turn with me in your Bibles to Mark chapter 9. I will be in Mark chapter 9, beginning in the 14th verse. We are going to see the role of unbelief in our life, the role of belief in our life, and what to do when failure comes. Our story, our tone for this gospel reading is failure. The disciples failed on multiple domains. They failed even recognizing the mission of Jesus, who he is, and what he has called them to do. Just earlier in the book of Mark, we have disciples who could not recognize that Jesus is separate from Moses and Elijah. And as we heard in our gospel reading, the disciples have failed to even do what Jesus has called them to do. So you look with me in verses 14 through 18. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and it foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." Why did they fail? See, Mark records throughout the book that when Jesus first called his disciples, he gave them the authority to cast out demons, to heal the sick, and to preach the gospel. And Mark goes on to report that they were very much successful in all their endeavors. So what was different? What was different about this moment where the disciples who were successful before fail in this moment? And I can imagine they feel a lot of shame, a lot of doubt, and a lot of frustration. I mean, they were here arguing with the scribes, with the religious elites. They couldn't do what Jesus called them to do. In fact, they couldn't even be Jesus for a hurt and dying world. We look at the Father's words in 17 and 18. He says, "I came to you, but I got your disciples." I know you could heal things, but I got your disciples. We feel it here at a Church of the Ascension. We know that regardless of what people come with, whatever reasons they find themselves darkening the doors of our church, they all come so they can encounter Jesus. But when they come to encounter him, they get us. And what will we do? Will we be able to shepherd them, to help them along the way? So the disciples who had great success were failures in this moment. So why were they failures? Well, Jesus gives us a very simple answer. Look with me in verse 19. And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. The answer is very simple. It's unbelief. We know that the disciples had a way of doing things successfully. They were successful in all their endeavors up to this point. But at some point, the disciples ran empty on faith. They looked to their actions, their methods, their means to achieve what God has called them to do. They became very much self-reliant in the moments. They became self-reliant as they saw what worked and they knew that if we try one more time, it'll happen again. I mean, there was 9 disciples. Someone was bound to get it right. And I may not have cast out spirits. I've never done that. I know Seth has had some encounters with that. But I do know with this frustration of failing when you lean on your own understanding the things that you do. I've led many Bible studies, but nothing could quite prepare me for the worst antagonist to most Bible studies, college-age men. I love these men. Some of them were best men at my weddings and groomsmen at my wedding. But in that moment, they wanted nothing to do with what I had to do. I knew how to lead a Bible study. I knew how to pray, to read the text, to extract information from the text, to apply it. I knew it. I had a foolproof, short-proof method to understanding God's word, lead a Bible study. But they wanted nothing to do with that. They would rush to prayers, wanted nothing to do with what God was saying, and the quicker they can get out of there to go to the gym or whatever they want to do next, that was their agenda. And I thought if only I tried harder. Maybe I need to get on their back a little more, berate them a little more, try harder. I have a method. I fell into frustration because ultimately, in that moment, I was relying on myself, not God. That perhaps if I would lean on God and how to lead these men, I would have had a little more success in those their moments of ministry. The unbelief exposes our reliance on self. It shows us that when we run low on faith, we lean into those things that we're so comfortable and familiar with it, which is self-reliance. So if unbelief is our problem, then our solution is faith. Belief embraces our reliance on God. Belief embraces our reliance on God. Now we're going to see the Father who is going to embody this great faith. But before we get there, Jesus takes a deep dive into his life. If you look with me in verses 20 through 22. And they brought the boy to him. But when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell in the room, and rolled about foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy them. But if you could do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Surely in this moment, we all feel compassion, empathy, and the frustration of the Father. And then Jesus asks him a question: how long has this been happening? Now, throughout the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus does healings, it's often not taking a deep dive into how long has this been happening. And this is no small detail. It's for us, the reader, to get a glimpse of the hopelessness of the situation that the father was going through. I can imagine his frustration in spending most nights sleepless, worried that his son, his dear son, will be cast into water, cast into fire, hurt, destroyed, killed. How many sleepless nights he had when fearing that his son would seize, and he's not sure if it was the last time it would happen. How many religious leaders and healers did he go to before he just gave up? This father is running low on faith. How long can this father go when his son is in despair? We feel that frustration. This father recognized, I am just not enough. In this moment, I need Jesus. In this father's story, it reminds me of my wife's story. My wife, Courtney, is over there, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 14. I imagine the shocks of her family, but with that diagnosis came multiple sleepless nights, multiple nights staying awake in pain and suffering, asking God, why? She did all the right things. She pricked her fingers. She carb counted. She exercises. She even takes her own unique meals to social events so that others don't have to worry about providing her food. She did everything right, yet she could tell you that even in doing everything right, it often wasn't enough. That you're wondering, the frustration comes that you will fail in these moments. Her story is the Father's story. It is also our story, where we meet doing all the right things, yet we're met with failure. And this father in this moment understood his truest need. We look in verses 23 and 24. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. Mark includes that little question. This father who is coming to Jesus in his most desperate situation, saying, help us. And Jesus says, if you are able. It sounds rude, but what Jesus is doing and what Mark is doing, he's connecting this story to the story of the disciples who were unable to do what the Father needed because they lacked faith. Yet immediately this father understood the situation. He got it. He understood that it is a faith that embraces his need for God. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I cannot do this on my own. The Father's faith was a foil of the disciples. Now, you'd be hearing this, and if you could imagine, it's like, well, if I just believe, will my impossible go away? And I don't have an answer for that. I don't. I don't know why my wife's illness remains while many people have prayed for it. But I don't know why some people who have been prayed over and they've been healed. But it's not specifically diving into the healing. It is the matter of faith. Where is our faith in the moments when we are failing? We can all relate to is the faith when we first came to Jesus. Because the most impossible thing that one could happen is the dead coming to life. It is no coincidence that our gospel reading today is sandwiched between two accounts of Jesus mentioning his own death and resurrection. Even when he transfigured himself for the disciples, he mentioned again his death and resurrection. And in our story, we have a boy who appeared as dead after the demon was cast out, and then Jesus lifted him up and he rose again. See, our faith that embraces our need for God, that started when we first came to him. Because it is in resurrection hope that our greatest need, our greatest frustration, has been relieved by God. So we understand the situation that belief embraces our need for God, because Jesus took care of that first need. Now, if unbelief exposes our self-reliance and belief embraces our reliance on God, how do we put this into action? How do we handle failure, the frustration of failure, when we're doing all the right things? Simple. Demonstrate faith that needs God by surrendering your self-reliance through prayer. Demonstrate a faith that needs God, depends on God, by surrendering your self-reliance through prayer. We see this in verses 28 through 29. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, this kind could not be driven out by anything but prayer. Now, in the military, we have these post-event gatherings known as after-action reports, AAOs. The whole goal is to tell you what happened or what should have happened, what did happen, 3 sustains, and 3 improves. I know Ryan's a little triggered. Probably burned 1,000 of these. In our situation, what was supposed to happen? An exorcism. What didn't happen? and exorcism. There are no sustains in the failures of these disciples, but Jesus gives them only one improve. One improve. These kind can only come out by prayer. Now, Jesus wasn't offering his disciples, his self-reliant disciples, and us, a solution, another means of which they can achieve exorcism. The reason he mentions prayer, because prayer is the epitome of utter dependence and need for God. We live in this world full of the genre of self-help. Me and the wife were just at Half Price Books yesterday, and there's just a large section on self-help books. A growing need. And I'm not saying that a properly scheduled routine, daily habits, even morning prayer are necessarily wrong. But when Christians rely heavily on how they can get things done apart from faith, it will not go well. They will fail. Because we as believers are fully dependent on faith, and prayer is the epitome of that need. We here at Church of the Ascension, we have a practice for our evangelism strategy called BLESS. Now, BLESS is an acronym, the first letter being begin with prayer. And if you have this beginning, don't worry if you haven't, we're encouraging each other that prayer is not a first step to get you to the next step, to get you to the next step, and so on. In fact, prayer is actually how you bless others, bless those who you would hope to come to faith in Jesus Christ. Prayer is not a stepping stone that you can discard later when you feel like you've achieved the next step. You've served someone, you've shared His word. You continue in prayer. So cultivate a prayer life that truly relies on God to take over, that truly relies on God to step in and save the lives of those you know, to bring them to the hope and gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, failure comes, we're going to feel that frustration, especially when doing all the right things no longer works. For the Word of God is undoubtedly tough and sometimes impossible. However, the Christian must not turn to self-reliance, but accept their need for God who helps our unbelief. Now, I began this sermon with the story of Mr. Wilson. I don't know who Mr. Wilson is. This is a story I see. It's a true story. And Mr. Wilson hit rock bottom in 1934. He was done. He was exhausted. He exhausted all efforts to find sobriety. But in a moment, one of his old drinking buddies, Ebby Catcher, came and gave him a visit. And he was shocked. Ebby Catcher, my old drinking buddy, the one I pound some beers with and shots and have all these drinks with, is sober. And Ebby Catcher told him that he found sobriety because he found God and he surrendered his life to him. And he encouraged Mr. Wilson, you need to find God. You need to surrender your life to him. So Mr. Wilson, wanting to surrender his life, he cried out, just like our Father, I'll do anything, anything at all. If there be a God, let him show himself. He then had a sensation of a bright light, a feeling of ecstasy, and a new serenity. He never drank again for the rest of his life. Now, Mr. William Griffith Wilson would later go on to create a group known as Alcoholics Anonymous to help others like himself. And those familiar with AA know that step 2 is admitting that you need the help from a higher power, but step 3 is surrendering your will to that power. The story of Mr. Wilson is the story of us all. We could do all the right things and hope for the best, but ultimately they will fail the believer apart from faith. We are at our best when we live by faith, a faith that depends deeply on God. The world deserves more Christians who are not self-sufficient, self-reliant, those who demonstrate a faith that needs God and surrenders to His will, submits to God by faith. Unbelief exposes our self-reliance. Faith or belief embraces our need for God. So let others see that when you are faced with failure and you turn to God by faith, that it is not by your own help, it is by God's. In the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.